All right. What do we got? How much time you got? All right, well, cue the light bulb.
Illuminating
and with that being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Sesame Workshop.
Can you tell me how to get to Sesame?
Now, before going into the CTW, it's important to know the people responsible for the neighborhood. Those two would be Joan Gantz Cooney and Lloyd Morrisett. Both were into social issues as well as social justice and helping disadvantaged youths in low-income neighborhoods. So let's go over these guys real quick. Joan Gantz Cooney was born November 30th of 1929 in Phoenix, Arizona. Born as the third sibling in her line, she would take interest in local school plays as well as theater. Bud Brown was one of her main inspirations despite her background being upper middle class. Bud would be her teacher at North High School regarding civil rights, anti-Semitism, free press, and poverty. Later, he would be arrested and investigated for being a communist. She would later attend Dominican College and later on transfer to the University of Arizona a year later in 1948. She would go into teaching as a recommendation by her mother and would cease doing theater altogether. Fast forward to 51, Cooney would move to DC to work for the State Department as a typist. Later on would be influenced by father James Keller. James Keller would be responsible for the Christophers, a movement that believes in, quote, to light a candle rather than to curse the darkness, with the philosophy of social change with regards to helping the poor, dealing with people with substance abuse problems, and political honesty. Father Keller told his followers, quote, if idealists don't get into media, then the non-idealists will. Words to live by if you catch my drift real quick. Cooney would later move back to Arizona and get into journalism with no prior experience at Arizona Republic. By 53, Cooney would move to New York City to be a publicist for RCA, CBS, and NBC. Now I know what you're thinking. What does PBS and Sesame Street have to do with any of this? Stay tuned for that. While working for the anthology series United States Steel Hour for CBS, a colleague would leave for Boston to work for WBGH TV, which would shock her as there was limited public TV in the tri-state area, while at the same time would get into an investigation regarding a battle between Newark, New Jersey and a New York City nonprofit claiming the independent station WNTA TV, which would later be WNET, or 13 for us Jersey folks who know about the two PBS stations that we have here, the other one being NJN. I forget what it's called now. She would then become a producer as the newly acquired channel would become non-commercial. Cooney, along with Louis Friedman and Michael Davis, would create the shows Court of Reason, which would have special guests and activists Calvin Butts and Malcolm X, as well as Poverty, Anti-Poverty, and The World, which would aim to get government officials and low-income/impoverished people to address social inequality and develop anti-poverty programs. Cooney would win various Emmy Awards for her work, which was regarded as, quote, the viewers who did tune in were serious-minded adults who cared about matters about race and justice and the imbalance of opportunity in New York and beyond. Now we get into the second founder and creator, and trust me, it all ties together. Lloyd was born November 2nd, 1929 in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. To avoid the Dust Bowl, the Morrisett family would move to Yonkers, New York, then relocate to Los Angeles, California, where Lloyd would meet Julian Gantz in middle school. She would be the precursor to the meeting of both founders. As time went on, Lloyd would attend Oberlin College and receive his BA in philosophy. He would later get into experimental psychology as he would be fascinated by the study. By 1953, Lloyd would later attend Yale to get his PhD in experimental psychology. His main study would help early sports psychology and his dissertation, quote, the role and implicit practice in learning by using a game of darts. By 1956, he would be the professor at the University of California at Berkeley, but would quit as he would see the uninterest in his students. Later would study and work for the Social Science Research Center, which would then lead him to meet Alan Newell and Herbert A. Simon. Morrisett would then join the Carnegie Institute. In 1959, under the Carnegie Institute, he would do research and a program for minority and poor children. However, his program would only get a few hundred kids. Now we get into CTW. During the turn of the 60s, Americans were getting TVs at alarming rates, while children were consuming TV at 27 hours per week. At the same time, child psychology was becoming more of a forefront as time progressed. The main study was that children were better off in life and in education if they prepared early, albeit poor and minority groups were at the back end of the education marker. Research in the 60s would come back very low, and when it came to test scores for low-income homes, the rate kids were prepared for school was abysmal as well, as developmental psychology was becoming more prevalent, so was the challenge of bringing disadvantaged youths out from the educational pit. By 1966, Joan would have a dinner party with the team in the Gramercy Park neighborhood. The discussion would be on if television was able to teach children, to which Lloyd wanted to experiment with as he bought his study on reaching only a few hundred children with his program. Progressing further, Morrisett and Cooney would bring this to the Carnegie Corp in creating a feasible study in which television could help benefit children. While making initial investments at 8%, Cooney would hire Evelyn Payne Davis from the Urban League to better understand the urban and inner-city market, and Bob Hatch, who would focus on the marketing of the first children's series. As the CTW was being founded, Cooney's questioning into being an executive director was brought up, as she had little to no experience doing the job. But with the help of her husband and Morrisett, investors would go through with making her executive producer, as they couldn't do it without her. With Cooney being the head of the study, this would be the start of the biggest television series in history.
Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Sesame Street.
Continuing on with the study, the main goal was to, quote, master the addictive qualities of television and do something good with them. By 1966 would be the start of their 2-year research and the foundation of CTW, which would receive $8 million from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, which will be the next video, the federal government, Carnegie, and the Ford Foundation. By 1968, the foundation of CTW was announced at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel at a press conference. Fast forward to May 6, 1969, Sesame Street would be officially announced while Joan made the main premise of the show about learning the basics of numbers, letters, and critical thinking. The name Sesame Street came from the term
Open Sesame!
in which exciting things would happen within the show. Research for the show dealt with the attention spans of children and targeting not only cognitive thought and attention span, but how to use repetition, modeling, and humor to make learning fun. Research testers for the show also argued that Sesame Street should also teach tolerance of diversity, social competence, and resolving conflicts using nonviolence. The team would also reach out to Jim Henson, responsible for The Muppet Show, after the first meeting with Lloyd at a curriculum seminar out of Boston. Jim would be reluctant on making Muppets and joining an IP on a research basis, albeit many early creators would argue if Jim Henson could not join Sesame Street, they should make do without the Muppets. With the show aligning with what Jim believed socially, Jim would join Sesame Street on a few conditions. He would waive performance fees in return for full ownership of Sesame Street. In addition, would split profits with CTW. Research psychologists would argue against the Muppets and humans in similar segments. However, tests came back positive for the integration, as Oscar the Grouch and Big Bird were made for the combination. Writing for the show would be heavily difficult, as most writers would experience burnout, and Sesame Street was against having teachers write the show from a teacher's perspective. The first season for the show would be a complete fallout, as the show would be bad with advertising for low-income residents. As 5 episodes would go by, the show would go back to the drawing board. Data shows that Sesame Street was played in 67.7% of households, and Nielsen ratings data proved that 1.9 million American homes were broadcasting the show with a 3.3 rating. Sesame Street would be the biggest show in America and lead PTV and show ratings for educational television. By 1970, Sesame Street would be garnering many awards such as the Clio, Peabody, Parents' Choice, Public Restorations of Society, and the Prix Genuise. The show itself wouldn't come without certain controversy. Sesame Street in the 70s was rejected by southern states like Mississippi, as the state commission that ran the PBS member station said that because of the racially diverse cast in the show, the Mississippi PBS station would block it from airing, as Mississippi wasn't ready for that. As the seasons kept going, psychologists and sociologists alike claimed that the show was, quote, too wholesome. As the show kept going even further, Bert and Ernie's sexuality was brought up by Richard Roper. Feminist and Hispanic activist groups were coming to the forefront on how Latina people and women in general were portrayed within the show. Sesame Street would vow to make said changes within the show.
Letter D! Ha ha! Today letter is letter D.
As CTW and Sesame Street were creating waves across the country, it would set the standard for educational television. With the controversy and positives, CTW would start to profit off Sesame Street. By the 1970s, CTW and the federal government would come to a complete standoff, as the feds would pause funding and freeze checks until the last marking period of CTW's fiscal year, making the studio rely on licensing with toy companies, international sales, and publishing. By the second season of Sesame Street would bring up the next show. During the second season of Sesame Street, Lloyd Morrisett, Joan, Cooney, and Paul Dooley would produce another show for an older crowd. The premise of the Electric Company was to help elementary school kids with grammar and reading skills with sketch comedy. The original cast ranged from Morgan Freeman, Judy Graubert, Rita Moreno, Skip Hannett, Lee Chamberlain, and it was a different time, guys. It was a different time. The skits were Love of Chair, Giggles Goggles, The Adventures of Letterman, 5 Seconds, Roadrunner, and Slow Reader. At the peak of the show's popularity, it would be canceled. Mainly, it was because of one reason alone.
Money!
And it just gets even more dumb. During the time of airing, the show would not have a mascot to help further the brand, which at the time would have VHS tapes and a board game by Milton Bradley. In addition, PBS stations were often complaining about CTW taking up too much airtime, calling it, quote, soaking up so much money in public television. The choice was either to make Sesame Street or the Electric Company go to reruns. While Sesame Street's footing was dominating public broadcasting, CTW decided financially with ending the Electric Company after 6 seasons, with the last episode having this to say.
We're glad you came to call. We really had a ball. The show is done. We hate to run. We're sorry, but that's all.
The show would rerun on Noggin while getting a revival in the 90s. As the Electric Company would end in 1977, it would be the catalyst to teaching grammar in public schools and would be used in many schools across the country. Later on, CTW would venture into making adult content, which to me made no sense. Making an adult drama called The Best of Families that would only last 6 episodes before the company itself said to only focus on children's content only. CTW would make sure that the other parts of the country, such as Appalachia, Native American tribes, and migrant camps, would receive the show free of charge. In the beginning of the 1980s, CTW would create the Preschool Education Program, or PEP, which was a program to help schools with media and books to better prepare kids for grade school. Later on in the 80s, the company would drop in revenue, but would not stop from its next broadcast.
3, 2, 1, contact!
The concept of the show came from the Electric Company executive producer Samuel I. Gibbon Jr., with the idea of the show came from the Australian hit show Curiosity Shop. Sam wanted to make the show into an American version during his time on the Electric Company. PBS interjected as the production was going to use middle-aged adults to teach science lessons. Sam would go back to the drawing board and use college students as well as celebrities ranging from Sarah Jessica Parker, Rita Moreno, and Gene Wilder. Topics would range from weather, nature, or teaching with celebrities. Extra content ranged from social issues such as age, drugs, and teen problems. The show would last 7 seasons before later getting canceled on November 18, 1988, but in the last year, they would fund their next broadcast. After the final seasons of 3-2-1 Contact, Square One Television was made to combat low test scores in the mathematics area. The first episode aired January 26 of 1987. The segments would be different in math topics such as algebra, fractions, probability, and estimation. Different from the counterpart Schoolhouse Rock, Square One Television would have parodies from General Hospital, I Love Lucy, and A Night with David Letterman on teaching math subjects. Along with original segments like Math Man, Math Dog, The Announcer, and Mr. Glitch, the show would last 7 seasons while ending its run in October 7th of 1994. Noggin would pick up the show later on as reruns in the early years of launch. Later on in the 80s, CTW would produce their first feature-length film, Follow That Bird, featuring Big Bird. By the 90s, Cooney would step down from her role as CEO. David Britt would be her successor, as he worked under Cooney for many years. Fast forward to 1995, Sesame Workshop would lay off 12% of its workforce for reconstruction of the company. At the end of reconstruction in 1998, Sesame Street would take on donors from big companies as it was leaned off of federal funding, and Sesame Street became an American media staple. While at the same time, main investments with Nickelodeon to create the Thinking Channel, better known as I'm Not Doing It Again. Y'all got that at home. By 1999, CTW would produce the second feature-length Sesame Street movie, The Adventures of Elmo in Grouchland, while in unison would create their next biggest PBS show. As Sesame Street would continue to air on television for 20 years, the rise of educational television shows would come about, mainly because television shows themselves were mandated by the FCC to bring on educational shows or risk their broadcast license. and would bring competition to the once-loved Muppet neighborhood. Blue's Clues from Nickelodeon, using the same research and challenging Sesame Street's idea and format, Barney and Friends and Teletubbies from PBS would compete and outshine Sesame Street. As a result, CTW would research why Sesame Street, which once dominated the airwaves, was then garnering low views with the millennial generation. Research from Blue's Clues claimed that Sesame Street was static with kids, only using video media that stayed in 1 or 2 frames. At the same time, CTW came back and found after 20 years, their formula wasn't working with kids who at early demographics were gravitating to shows that were more fast-paced and sophisticated. CTW combated this by lowering the age of the show from 4 years old to 3 years old, while also creating a 15-minute segment on the most popular Muppet. Elmo, after 20 years, would be beloved by many kids, and according to test runs, it made more sense to make a show regarding Elmo than Big Bird. The show would focus more on 3-year-old topics and help garner imagination using Elmo. Sesame Street writer Judy Fruedberg would be responsible for creating the show, and she would do so in a different format, while Mo Willems, responsible for Sheep in the Big City and the Offbeats, would be head animator with Curious Pictures to assist with the project. Elmo's World will be a combination of animation and live-action Muppetry. Tony Gice would come up with the theme song Elmo Song. Elmo was the only talking host, as the goldfish Dorothy and the Noodle family were silent to leave the imagination to kids. The 15-minute segment would air November 16, 1998, and reception for the show came back positive. Critics would compare the crayon background-infused world with Pee-wee's Playhouse. The show would last 17 seasons before being wrapped up in 2009. It was replaced with Elmo the Musical in 2012.
Come along, take my hand. Let's all go to Dragonland.
Dragon Tales goes back to Rob Rodecker, former educator from Maguana Beach, California. Early work were sketches from 1978 as he was recovering from a coronary artery bypass graft. During his recovery in 1995, Columbia TriStar television producer Jim Cohen would come across Rob's artwork during the Sawdust Festival in a book called, quote, The Encyclopedia of Legendary Creatures, and would want to make his characters into a show. But because of the risk of investment was high due to the fact that the show itself not being on a level of Arthur or Paddington Bear, Rob's idea would then be shipped over to PBS and member stations who would collectively reject the idea outright. To convince the idea to a studio, Jim would meet Majori Callens, vice president of programming at CTW. He would pitch the idea over to Majori, who in return would partner CTW with Columbia TriStar. In addition, would have a proposal written by Wesley Ear. The characters made by Ear were Zack and Wheezy, but in the early pirate were called Snarf and Bugger, to win over the federal government in a multi-million-dollar grant. After the pilot, the show was given an $8.5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Under certain conditions, the show itself needed to have a companion series for the grant to go through. Ear would make a series called Show and Tell Me, but would not get it off the ground. Dragon Tales was considered for other networks, albeit Rob only wanted it to air on PBS. Story and show Bibles were collaborated on by Cliff Ruby, Alana Lessa, and Jeffrey Scott. A document was given over to PBS called Fun and Learning in Dragonland, a writer's guide to Dragon Tales educational content. Unlike Sesame Street, Dragon Tales would go a step further in its curriculum to teach kids about understanding emotions, emotional challenges, while also understanding the feelings of others. Columbia TriStar would be the third outside major Hollywood studio to produce a show for PBS under federal funding. A lot of animation would come from South Korea and be produced under Cell Animation for the last 3 seasons. During the initial launch, Dora the Explorer was not conceived as of yet by Nickelodeon until the 2000s, making Dragon Tales the initial Hispanic show with Hispanic male and female main characters. As the show would make Emmy and Max Mexican American, while the third protagonist, Enrique, would come from Colombia. Dragon Tales would also mix English and Spanish with the show to teach kids bilingual speech in a fun way. Kellogg's would later fund the show as the seasons progressed. The reception came back positive. Dragon Tales would last 3 seasons while getting a Game Boy game and PC games made. On June 5, 2000, CTW would change the name of the company to Sesame Workshop to further the name outside of media and non-television. Later on, Gary Nell would be the next successor to the company. Under his leadership, would create more shows for Noggin while also creating the interactive game Spunk, while in addition creating the next 2 short-lived series.
Somebody come and play today with me, Sesame!
After Noggin was created in 1999, Nickelodeon would ask for permission from Jim Henson to create a Sesame Street spin-off show. This was made only using 4 Muppets: Prairie Don, Bert, Ernie, and Grover, while Nick Digital would use the same concept as Elmo's World. Tom Ansheim wanted to make physical activities, coloring, and playing computer games a part of the show's experience. Fun fact, the backgrounds were also used in Moose Moose and Z shorts. The series would launch April 1st, 2002. Play With Me Sesame would be the pivot Noggin needed, as Noggin was only known for reruns of Nickelodeon and Sesame Workshop shows. This would mark Noggin's first original preschool show. While MTV would make a live-action series out of the show called Play With Me Sesame Male Tour, CBS would make the show widely known on early morning news slots. This show would last 3 seasons.
Sagwa, you're my best friend. Sagwa.
Sagwa was made by Amy Tan, a Chinese writer born from a Chinese immigrant family in Oakland, California. The story she would write would come from her difficult upbringing and personal struggles, while also tying in Chinese folklore. She would take on being a business writer after working odd jobs. Companies she would work for ranged from IBM, AT&T, and Pacific Bell, which turned into workaholism. Her first book, The Joy Luck Club, was made after joining the writers' workshops in the community of writers, and author Molly Giles would convince Amy to submit her work in magazines and newspapers. Manuscripts were posted on 17 and FM magazine, but was rejected by the New Yorker. After a few rejections, Giles would make a second workshop and push Amy's work, while at the same time be offered by G.P. Putnam and Sons for $50,000 in 1987. The book would then be picked up by Random House and Vintage Books on reprint rights in 1989. She would then later make The Kitchen God's Wife, The Bone Setter's Daughter, and 100 Secret Senses. Her book, The Chinese Siamese Cat, would be made in 1994. The plot of the book, Sagwa, would be a stray cat in a magistrate's house who would make rules that only benefit himself, until Sagwa would change the rules and change the way China would be. Amy's book would be revamped into a show in 2001, with the same premise but done in the late Qin dynasty when the cinematograph was invented. The show would teach the Chinese language along with family obligations and loyalty. Sagwa would only last 1 season. It would be one of the 3 lost media removed by PBS Kids, along with the Berenstain Bears and Zimboombafu. In the late 2000s, with a lucrative budget from the Tickle Me Elmo franchise line, along with profit from Noggin stock, would allow Sesame Workshop to buy the Jim Henson Company rights to the Muppets of Sesame Street. Valued at $180 million, Sesame Workshop was able to take full control of the Muppets made for Sesame Street. By April 1st, 2002, as Noggin was revamped for preschool, Sesame Workshop and Nickelodeon would create the sister channel called The End. Same video, guys. Did not forget. Sesame Workshop would take a chance on another original show made only for teenagers. The show was originally made by Nickelodeon and Sesame Workshop to appeal to teens. Later would be co-opted by ABC Australia and BBC Britain when they wanted to appeal to both American and EU audiences. As a result, Sesame Workshop would go back and revise the plot to make the main character from America being displaced in Australia, while characters were added like Aggie to appeal to the British crowds. With this revamp, ABC and BBC would fund it forward. The show was released May 23, 2003 with 2 seasons, and it would receive an Offie Award along with a Writers Guild Award. Later on in 2002, Sesame Workshop would sell Noggin stock at 50% to Viacom to make a multi-year production deal with Viacom and create the last show for Noggin.
Sorry. The Upside Down Show!
The show's origins come from an adult show called Speed Mouse by the Umbilical Brothers, performative comics Shane Dundas and David Collins. Executives from the Sesame Workshop would love the idea of the invisible remote that Speed Mouse would use controlling the actors' movements. This would aim to make a show regarding the imaginary remote in a kid-friendly way. When this production started, both comics made it so that the movements were regarding everyday things kids would do and to be interactive with the show. The pilot script would be approved by Noggin and be released October 13, 2006. While 13 episodes were made, reception came back mixed. While Noggin itself would be reluctant to order another season of the Upside Down Show, June 2007 was decided that Noggin would not go through with another season. While a movie was unfinished by Nickelodeon Australia, as there was not enough funding nor hype around giving the project life. With Noggin sold off and Sesame Workshop being in control of the Sesame Street Muppets, came the downward spiral days of the Sesame Workshop. Sesame Workshop would be in collaboration with different shows such as Pinky Dinky Doo in 2006, and Unison would collaborate with Hit Entertainment, PBS, and Comcast to create PBS Kids Sprout. If you guys are asking for it, I already got you, so I already made it. That's it. Fast forward to 2007, Sesame Workshop would create a nonprofit called the Joan Gantz Cooney Center to develop more technologies and tackle the education curriculum for low-income kids outside of Sesame Street. By 2008, the recession happened. Sesame Workshop faced the biggest economic uncertainty to where layoffs happened across the company. By 2009, the layoffs went up to a whopping 20%. Retirements were also plaguing Sesame Street as Gary Nell would step down to become the chief executive for NPR in 2011. His successor was H. Melvin Ming. By 2012 to 13, Sesame Workshop would lay off 10% of staff while operating at a $12.4 million loss despite toy deals, royalties, and being funded by the government. By 2014, H. Melvin Ming would step down and Nickelodeon executive Jeffrey D. Dunn would take his place, which brings us to HBO. By 2015, HBO and Sesame Workshop would be a part of a 5-year deal as a response to drastic changes within the media business. This deal in turn would help Sesame Street develop more episodes, increasing the 18-episode order to 35, while being able to simulcast from HBO to PBS. By 2019, the American Archive for Public Broadcasting would archive Sesame Street as a whole. To date, Sesame Street has 4,500 episodes, 35 TV specials, 180 albums, 200 home videos, and 2 home movies. Just pointing that out. While at the same time move all of the earlier seasons over to HBO Max. Sesame Workshop would be operating at a $1.6 million income according to the Hollywood Reporter, as most of the money would go back into the content. The 51st season would be launched exclusively on HBO Max in mid-2020. By January 15, 2023, Lloyd Morrisett would pass away in San Diego, California due to natural causes. He would be 93 years old, leaving the oldest former CEO, Joan Gantz Cooney, to still remain at her current age of 95. December 13, 2024 would mark the end of the Sesame Workshop and Max contract, as Max would remove over 200 old episodes in 2022. However, the catalog would still be watchable by the end of 2025, and the library would expire in January 2027, which brings us to the finale.
The show will start running new episodes on the platform later this year. Executives plan to keep Sesame Street on PBS at the same time.
Now, after the HBO Max deal expired, we are getting into what's going on with PBS as a whole. While I'm a content creator who does not impose a political ideology in any of my videos, this is a stop and think for many viewers who watch this channel. Anybody who asks my political affiliation, I mean, it's not even worth it. Now, if you've been living under a rock, this guy with the red hat has been currently defunding PBS and NPR as a whole. His reasoning, although PBS has been liberal for many years, it has devolved into woke propaganda. In hindsight, Sesame Street has been dunking on DJT for a long time. Here's where. The first time was in 1994 during the Sesame Street 25th anniversary episodes, Star and Street Forever. The synopsis of the episode was that a parody of the current president, Ronald Grump, played by Joe Pesci, was planning to build Grump Tower by destroying and rezoning Sesame Street, while the humans and Muppets who live on Sesame Street take a stand to stop Grump from building his tower, where the moral of the story is standing up for your neighborhood and community from the elite who want nothing more than to bulldoze for personal gain. Radical, I know, but isn't it ironic in the current day? The next time they parodied the current president was episode 4104, Grouch Apprentice, air date September 28, 2005, where a Grouch Muppet by the name of Donald Grump boasts about all the trash he currently owns. In lieu of all of his trash he possesses, he looks for an apprentice who is the exact opposite of who he is and hires Elmo to sort his trash. While Elmo passes his test, his allies detest Elmo for doing a good job. Donald fires Elmo for doing too much of a good job, while Elmo only wanted to help Donald because he is nice, while his allies would get the job and not want to do his grunt work. Now, I would employ the culture war people who might come see this video. Okay, so PBS and NPR get defunded, but this is what the current administration wants.
Be positive and look for the beauty in life. Appreciate creativity and aesthetics. Embrace your artistic side and the joy of making things beautiful. Make your house a home, and along the way, stay grateful and encouraging.
Let's keep it going.
Do you think we should be activists, just not radical ones?
Though it's good to listen to activists who want to improve things, but they have to be willing to work inside our system. Then you might want to join their cause. But if they are radicals like Garrison, you and your brother will be best served to stay away.
One more.
Slavery is as old as time and has taken place in every corner of the world, even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? I don't see the problem.
You guys sure you want that? To be in defense of Sesame Street, as well as the entire Sesame Workshop as an artist, I loved all the Sesame Workshop shows. As a young black male struggling with numbers and letters and was born with a speech delay, Sesame Street made sure I wasn't left behind. In addition, Sesame Street and other shows made by Sesame Workshop taught kids to grow and be better human beings, to strive to be something more, to care for our neighbors and our community, to value our community that we live in, to have empathy for others in the face of apathy. Research by people who made it so that our world can be better for everyone, written for all races, backgrounds, and social classes, not just one, proving that education is not just important but should have value and be valued. To throw this all away is not only hurting us but many generations to come, and albeit there is a silver lining. Sesame Street gon' be alright. Netflix has reached a deal with Sesame Workshop to stream old and new seasons of Sesame Street. The estimate of how much the deal is unknown to the public. However, it is rumored that the deal itself is less than the previous contract with Warner Bros. Discovery, which at the time was $30 million plus annually. With the new deal, new episodes will come onto PBS and then streamed onto Netflix to broaden the worldwide audience. And that's all she wrote. At least for now. Sesame Street will never go away. And for those culture war edgelords who will find this and say, well, we've won the culture war, you didn't. Sesame Street, much like The Simpsons, SpongeBob, and Jeopardy, is a historical icon embedded in American history. And doing away with it is not only idiotic, but un-American. Oh yeah. I go there. Helping kids get onto a better education path was not just broadcasted but researched thoroughly, paving the way for many generations to be prepared in life regardless of race, social class, or creed. And if you guys are parents or guardians or anything like that, I just have a question for you. Would you give your kids Sesame Street or would you give them Coco Melon? I'll wait. While Sesame Workshop has seen drastic changes in our current day, while at the same time being targeted by government officials, it's safe to say that Sesame Street will always be okay. However, it is up to us to keep it going. Whether they be old or new episodes or showing shows like Dragon Tales, The Electric Company, or The Upside Down Show, making sure that these works to the next generation is paramount to how the future will pan out.
Street is brought to you by a ready-to-learn television cooperative agreement from the U.S. Department of Education through the Public Broadcasting Service, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you. Thank you.
Funding for this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting